You're good.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. This is the Montgomery County House Delegations Education, Elections, and Housing Committee meeting. It is January 25th, 10 a.m. And we're having a work session this morning to go over two of our bills and possibly vote them out. So our first bill on the agenda is MC 122, Montgomery County Business Regulation Landlord License. This bill was heard in the delegation 2 Fridays ago, and it is requested by Delegate Carr. We have our bill sponsor, my district mate, here today. And I understand he has offered an amendment as well. So why don't we start, please, by having a discussion on the amendment? And then we will consider that, and then we'll discuss the bill as amended and make a decision at that point. So Delegate Carr, will defer to you now to discuss the proposed amendment, which colleagues you have received from Rebecca Stryer, and it is also located in the Google Drive.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, colleagues. And yes, so the amendment should be version 6. Thank you very much to our brilliant delegation counsel who helped me with this amendment. But the amendment strikes the bill. So now the amendment pretty much is the bill. So it's fairly easy to read. But the amendment, the bill is amended, addresses the concerns that were raised about the bill in the hearing. So gone from the bill as amended is the license, which was additional to the license that a building owner would have to get from the county or municipality. So that is gone. That was I think one of the top concerns raised by our friends at the DC-based AOBA, and also from the Baltimore-based Multi-Housing Association. Gone is the fee that was associated with that license. Another concern that was raised by these two organizations was the definition of tenant. So that concern has been addressed as well. By placing this bill into the real properties article, we're just using those existing definitions of tenant and landlord. So that concern should be addressed. But what remains in the bill is, the core issue of, how can we help ensure that the tens of thousands of Montgomery County residents who are tenants are getting access to a second broadband provider, cable provider, so that they have a choice like people who live in single family homes and townhouses do. So one addition to the bill is on page 2, where section D, it says, where a landlord may require compensation in exchange for allowing the installation of cable television system equipment on the parcel of property. We added the words, that is competitively neutral and non-discriminatory. And that was at the request of Verizon. They provide, the Fios cable TV system. And while they didn't testify, they did give me this suggestion for an addition to the bill that it made sense to me. So I included it in the amendment. Also, at the very end of the amendment on page 3, F and G, that adds an enforcement mechanism, because in the original bill, the license was the enforcement mechanism. You could withhold the license to enforce the policy goal, but we are replacing that with a different enforcement mechanism. We're giving the different parties the right to go to district court. That follows exactly the law in DC. And we're also going to enable the county. If the county wants to enact a local law to enforce, we're going to allow them to do that as well. So I think this bill as amended is in the spirit of compromise, in the spirit of collaboration, and really attempts to address the concerns that were raised while preserving the intent of the bill. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Delegate Carr. Appreciate all of your hard work in collaborating with all of the stakeholders who care about this issue and really trying to find common ground. I think that's important in policies that we pursue. So I'm very grateful to you because I know that you did work very hard to make this amendment happen. I would like to recognize any committee members who might have any questions for either the bill sponsor, or we also have a couple of individuals here who already shared testimony during the bill hearing. They will not be asked to specifically speak here as is custom unless asked a question. So if you have a question about any of the stakeholders' views on this, I welcome you to raise your hand and I will recognize you. No questions from members of the EEH committee? Going once, twice? Okay, thank you. Then may I have a motion on the amendment proposed by the delegate bill sponsor?
Move favorable on the amendment.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's a second from Delegate Collison, I believe. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed to the amendment? Anyone would like to abstain? The amendment passes. Now we will discuss the bill as amended, which is the amendment that we just voted on. May I have, well, is there any discussion?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I think just for fairness, because I think it looks like he really wants to talk, I will call on Mr. Greenfield to get his thoughts. I have a feeling that Mr. Greenfield and I, as we sometimes do, disagree on the bill, but I do want to afford him the opportunity to share his 2 cents.
Thank you.
Delegate Stewart, thank you as always, and I do appreciate it. And I appreciate Delegate Carr reaching out and suggesting these amendments, but they do not resolve our issue. Let me be very clear. And let me also be clear that while our offices are in Baltimore County, we have members in Montgomery County and in the DC area. So I just want to make that point. Let me say a few things about this. I do give Delegate Carr tremendous credit in striking the landlord license language, which is and was unprecedented. But let me speak a little bit to the problems with this bill. The definition of tenant still allows any occupant of the premises, regardless of whether they're in privity of contract. It does, Delegate Carr, allow them to call a carrier and have a carrier come in and hook up that one unit, if they so, without the property owner having any say in the discussion. So the definition of tenant is still problematic. You have this issue of property disruption and potential liability when you have the property owner not part of the discussion about whether there's going to be service provided to a particular unit, which this bill would allow. The bill also doesn't allow for the carrier to come back and restore the premises by removing its equipment and fixing any damage done by virtue of this bill. The other thing that the delegate has done in his amendments is made this language compensation is competitively neutral and non-discriminatory. We're not sure who makes that decision and what that means. That's a problem. And then lastly, the FCC, as I testified in December before the delegation, is taking this very issue up right now. They're revisiting the issue. They made a decision in 2007 not to allow exclusive access. And that has been the law of the land. The DC and Anne Arundel County, as I've said to Delegate Carr, are pioneers. They enacted their ordinances well before the FCC chimed in. Now the FCC is revisiting that 2021, or now in 2021, revisiting the decisions they made since 2007. And I would just say that it's somewhat problematic to have one county in one state legislate this, which is under the auspices of the FCC. So it's unfortunate that we haven't had all stakeholders at the table to discuss this, but I think, what you've set up is you've set up in this bill an opportunity for one occupant of a unit, not necessarily a tenant, to ask for service. And the question really becomes, from a practical standpoint, whether the carrier is actually going to invest in bringing coverage to that one unit. I submit they probably won't. But that is a discussion and a question, I think, for the carriers.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Greenfield, for sharing your perspective and your feedback. This is helpful. Did the amendment address any of the concerns that you raised during the initial bill hearing?
It did. It did raise the issue of the landlord license, which took it out of the bill, which I appreciated because it would have required in Silver Spring a mom and pop landlord to have 2 licenses only in Montgomery County. So we appreciate Delegate Carr striking that language.
Okay, that's helpful. And did the amendment also make it a little bit closer to how your current members in DC operate?
Well, I don't have members in DC. Aaron Bradley can speak to members in DC perhaps.
Oh, I
but
thought
again,
you had just said that though you're based in Montgomery or in Baltimore County, you have members throughout Maryland, in Montgomery County and in DC. Did I miss
well, some of our members have places in DC, but again, the DC ordinance was enacted before, like Anne Arundel County, well before 2007, when the FCC already said you can't allow for exclusive access.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bradley, you had a comment?
Sure. I was just going to start to DC, as Aaron alluded to. Now, the ordinance they're in compliance with the FCC requirements. So everything is kind of under these FCC auspices govern exclusive access agreements.
Okay, Ms. Bradley, I'm so sorry, but I'm having difficulty. I think your audio is skipping. If it's okay, would you mind please adding it to the chat and I'll read what you've said? That will be very helpful. I would like to recognize Delegate Carlson for a question, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is for Aaron. Can you describe what the liability is if a tenant, and I understand the issue with the definition of tenant, but contracts with a carrier independently and to have the service in their particular unit? What's the liability? What's the challenge that you have there?
Under the current amended version.
Under
right?
the amended version, right?
Well, thank you for the question, Delegate Collison. I think it's an open question, right? Because what you have under the bill is you have someone who just happens to occupy a unit, may not be in privity of contract under the lease. They can then request service from a carrier. They don't own the property, right? And the landlord is completely out of this transaction under the bill. So the question becomes, what if there's damage done by the carrier? And who's paying for that damage when the tenant's not responsible? They don't own the property, but the landlord does, and the landlord's not part of this transaction. So it's an open question, Delegate. I don't know exactly how the liability would work in this instance, other than the property owner is ultimately responsible for any damage that occurs. And they're not in contract with the carrier under this bill.
May I follow up, Madam Chair?
Yes.
So what you're saying is that, so I own my home, the carrier, I choose a carrier. So I'm not a renter. So I'm just trying to take it out of that context. I choose a carrier. The carrier comes, there's damage to my home. The carrier is not liable for the damage?
Well, it depends. It's an open question. I don't know. Again, I'm saying the carrier should be responsible, but who's going to enforce that in this scenario when the property owner isn't part of the transaction at all? So in this situation, you have a tenant requesting, or someone who occupies the premises requesting service for one unit, which again, practically speaking, is problematic to begin with, because I don't think carriers are going to come in to wire one unit. But you know, I think there's something more that's involved in that. But I guess it's an open question. So if a carrier comes in and does damage, I assume the carrier would be responsible to the property owner. But again, the property owner isn't the one that's requested the service.
But okay, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not understanding why they wouldn't be responsible for the damage in general to the property.
Well, they may be, but remember, the question becomes, who's in contract with the carrier? I assume it's, in this case, the tenant or the person occupying the premises who's not a tenant necessarily, but defined as a tenant. So, you know, you're requesting service when it should be the property owner who's in contract with the carrier to provide the service. So it opens up liability questions if there are damage, there's a wire, someone trips and falls. I would think it would be the carrier, but it's fact dependent.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Carlson. And I just want to clarify, I think this issue may have been discussed during our initial bill hearing. And my understanding was that the part of the response was that this particular hypothetical hasn't happened in 20 years in Anne Arundel County that already has that, that this sort of worked out there. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that may be. I don't recall that testimony, but that could very well be the case.
Okay.
But again, I don't know frankly, how often this ordinance is actually enforced, because I'm not sure in the real world that a carrier comes in and wires one unit.
Okay. I mean, I can say as somebody who previously resided in a condo, and I recognize that this is specific to tenants, not condos, but I can say that, it's not uncommon in DC in particular, and I lived there before the change in law there, but I remember having a carrier come to wire my unit, and we had a different carrier for our neighbor's unit. So I don't think it's uncommon, but I will say that is, I don't think it's uncommon. So I hear what you're saying. So I think the next hand up was Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a follow-up question for Mr. Greenfield. I think early on in your remarks, you mentioned about the definition of tenant. I just took another quick look at the amendment and didn't see the term defined there. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that. Is this an instance of where we're piggybacking off of the definition of tenant that's in existing statute?
Yeah, I think Delegate Carr did mention that it's probably off an existing definition, but it's still problematic in this scenario because the way it's defined, the way tenant is defined, it includes other person occupying a residential dwelling unit. Other person occupying a residential dwelling unit. So in other words, if I live with my girlfriend and she's on the lease, I can request service to her unit, and I nor her own the property. So the definition of tenant goes beyond those that are actually in a lease agreement with the property owner. So it's almost a couple steps removed.
And so would this be an instance of where that could get tightened up in this amendment / now bill pending before us to actually just clarify that? Would that address the concerns if we said a tenant is specifically someone who's on the lease?
Well, I think you could tighten it up. I don't think it still gets us to where we're not going to oppose it. I think we still have, candidly, some significant concerns about the fact that the FCC has weighed in on this and is revisiting it. The fact that this bill still takes the property owner out of the transaction entirely, out of the discussion. So I think you could tighten it, but being very candid with you, I'm not sure that gets us to a neutral position.
Okay, so to clarify, no matter what amendments are added, you will not support the bill. I understand.
Yeah.
So the comment earlier that was made by Ms. Bradley, thank you for messaging it in. She said that DC members are currently complying with the FCC prohibition on exclusive access. I sent a contract from a DC member that outlines some of the intricacies, but all housing providers are now in line with FCC requirements from 2007. Thank you for sharing that. Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe my question got answered with that response. I was going to ask Mr. Greenfield, based on the impetus for this bill and why DC and Anne Arundel County may have already had this in place, and you mentioned the FCC is looking at it. So I wanted to know, was this an issue the FCC is looking at it and dragging their feet, so we need to act? Or do we have some sense of how long this has been in deliberation and or have any sense of its status with the FCC?
Yeah, so you have our written testimony and updated testimony, which I've submitted to the chair. This is an issue that the FCC has taken up over several times since 2007, is my understanding. And as recently as 2021, President Biden in September asked the FCC to revisit this issue amongst other issues as indicated in my written testimony. So I don't know that it is the federal government, so I'm not sure if they're dragging their feet, Delegate Queen, but I do know that there is a process currently underway. And that gets to one of the points I raised earlier, which is it's somewhat problematic to have the state legislate this for one county and one state. It seems awfully strange to do it for one county and one state at the state level. Perhaps it's something the county council could do, but again, I don't know that that's relevant given where the FCC is and has been.
Okay, thank you for that excellent question and response. Vice Chair Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick follow-up on the FCC issue, Aaron. So my understanding, if my recollection serves, and for full disclosure, I actually, in my past life as an evil corporate lawyer, worked on some of these FCC issues. So my understanding is that I think back in 2007, as you said, I couldn't remember what year, but in 2007, that was, of course, when there was a Republican majority on the FCC. You know, the president appoints the commissioners, but sometimes there's, you know, there are holdovers and it gets complicated. But obviously that was still during the Bush years, and so there was a Republican majority in FCC. And I think their conclusion then was that these exclusive wiring agreements, right? I think that's the phraseology, did not violate any sort of anti-competition rules and were not necessarily unfair to tenants. Right? Is that right? Was that a conclusion in 2007 as far as you understand it?
So my understanding is exclusive access is prohibited, but exclusive marketing agreements are permitted.
Or exclusive wiring arrangements are not prohibited,
yes,
right?
Are not prohibited, but that is actually something, Delegate Stewart, that the FCC is currently taking up.
Well, that's what I was getting to, is I think that's what you were referring to, right? Is I think that there was basically like a request for public comment from the current FCC, the sort of the Biden FCC, about possibly going the other way on that and saying these exclusive wiring arrangements were actually anti-competitive. And so assuming that's right, I think it is. My question is, I don't know why then we would need to wait on the FCC to pass a law more protective of tenants. In other words, either the FCC will say, we're not going to weigh in, the status quo will reign, and then we're on the same footing as Howard and DC has been since 2007, or the FCC will come in with a more restrictive rule that is consistent with this bill, in which case I'm not really sure why that would be contradictory either. So just help me understand why the FCC weighing in, let's say in the summer, either sticking with the status quo or putting in a more pro-tenant bill would somehow be contradictory of our effort today.
Well, I just don't think it's necessary for one jurisdiction in one state to do this. I think this is something that the FCC is taking up. And why wouldn't we just follow what the FCC has done? Look, exclusive wiring is what, as you mentioned, this current status is where it is. Exclusive access is not permitted. Exclusive marketing agreements are. And these are things that the FCC is taking up as recently as September, a few months ago. So again, I'm not sure why it's necessary to legislate this in one county and one state at the state level.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegates Vice Chair Stewart and Mr. Greenfield. Chair Barve.
Yeah. Okay. I really haven't given this very much thought since the public hearing. I seem to remember in the pub, and forgive me, Madam Chair, if this has been covered when I was absent earlier in the hearing, in the work session. So I think I may have asked this question in the public hearing and didn't really get an answer. Does the county government have the ability to legislate in this instance?
I will defer to the bill sponsor to answer your questions on this.
Okay.
Delegate Carr.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Barve, for that great question. And the answer is yes, the county council does have the ability to legislate on this topic, and so does the state. Just like the Anne Arundel County Council did pass their law 15 years ago, the county council could do a law like this. One of the advantages of doing it in state legislation is that we will cover the entire county.
No, I
as opposed
understand.
to just the unincorporated portions of the county.
Yeah.
Omitting Rockville, Gaithersburg, Tacoma Park, et cetera.
And has the county government county council and executive weighed in on this local bill?
I do not believe they've taken a position. I believe they have no position on the bill. They reviewed the
Okay.
bill, they discussed it. They do not have a position one way or the other on the bill.
Melanie
Okay.
Wenger is here today too, if we want to ask if there's an update on
Oh,
that.
Melanie, I didn't notice you there.
Oh, I just thought I
Pop in.
might pop in on this one. Yeah, the delegate's correct. The county council, neither the county council nor the county executive, they're certainly aware of the bill, reviewed it, but neither has taken a position.
Okay, and okay. All right, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Barve. And just a reminder to colleagues who may have joined late, we are currently debating the bill as amended. The amendment strikes the bill and adds in a slew of new changes that Delegate Carr has worked very hard with all stakeholders involved to get as much compromise as possible while achieving the initial intent of the bill. The amendment passed unanimous, but given the debate that we've had and the information provided by Mr. Greenfield and Ms. Bradley. Sorry, thank you. I want to do a roll call vote on this one. If we have first a motion on the bill as amended.
Pardon me, Madam Chair. How is it amended? And forgive me.
That's okay. Why don't we do this? Delegate Carr, if you would, please describe the amendment one more time for the benefit of the committee.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chair Barve. So the amendment strikes the bill and it replaces it with new language that's intended to address the biggest concerns that were raised by legislators and also our friends who represent the landlords. So namely, gone from the bill as amended is the need for a license, which would have been additional to the license they already have to get from the county or municipality. Gone is the fee that was problematic. So those were the two biggest concerns. Also gone from the bill is the problematic definition of a tenant that was raised. And in an earlier version of the amendment, we specifically edited that definition of the tenant to address specifically, Aaron Bradley's concern and Mr. Greenfield. But then our brilliant delegation counsel, Jen Young, she realized that we could just take that out entirely because we're placing this bill into the real property article. We achieve the same thing by just omitting it entirely. So we're just relying on the existing definition of tenant that's in the real property article, which satisfies the exact same thing. It takes away the problem of the problematic tenant definition. The bill adds language that was requested by Verizon that says that when a landlord requires compensation, that compensation would be competitively neutral and non-discriminatory. And then finally, at the very end, it adds an enforcement mechanism, giving a tenant, landlord, or cable television company the right to bring an action in district court. That closely mirrors the DC law, and then it also allows the county to adopt a local law to enforce provisions of this section. So that's the bill as amended. That's offered in the spirit of compromise and collaboration. Addresses not every issue expressed by the Baltimore-based Mr. Greenfield, who I don't think is as familiar with Montgomery County as Ioba is. In the hearing, we had RCN, Ms. Bain. I don't think Mr. Greenfield was aware that in Montgomery County, we have 3 cable providers, one of which is RCN, and they were in the hearing and they testified in favor of the bill. And she can't be here today. We also had Mr. Lyons, who was the cable administrator for Anne Arundel County for 20 years. And he testified that, they've lived under these rules for many years. And, none of these hypotheticals, ever occurred. And so he wanted to be here this morning too, but he couldn't. But anyway.
I take it Comcast is still silent?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I apologize for slowing things down.
No, really appreciate the question. I think it's good, especially that now that we've had extended debate on it. So thank you so much for the question. Okay, then may I please get a motion on the bill as amended?
Sure thing. Delegate Queen, how do you vote?
Wait, I'm sorry, we have not yet gotten a motion and a second, have we?
Nope.
Okay.
I'll move favorable.
Thank you. Vice Chair Stewart moves the bill. And do we have a second, please?
In the spirit of District 19, I'll second.
Thank you, Delegate Collison. Then I will turn now to our council for a roll call. Thank you.
Delegate Queen, how do you vote?
One of my choices. Or
Yes or
for
no?
against, and you can abstain.
Yeah, but I think that abstentions on these bill are if you have a conflict of interest.
Okay. I will vote for the bill in terms of its intent. I still think it has some issues with getting resolved, but I will support the intent of what my colleague wants to do for.
Thank you, Delegate.
Delegate Plavkovich-Carr, how do you vote?
I'm actually going to do what Delegate Queen just said. I fully support the intent of the bill. I actually still have some technical questions about how a tenant is defined under this. So I'll vote for the bill today to advance it to full committee, but I'm going to circle back with the bill sponsor, I think after this meeting to address my other questions on that piece.
Thank you.
Delegate Collison, how do you vote?
For.
Delegate Barvet, how do you vote?
I'm going to vote for the bill. Obviously, if there are technical changes that have to be made in the delegation or in my committee, I'll entertain those, but I'll vote for it.
Vice Chair Stewart, how do you vote?
Same page as everyone else. I think that the bill could benefit from some more technical changes in full delegation or in Chairman Barvet's committee, but I'm going to vote to advance it.
Chair Shetty, how do you vote?
Yes.
And no explanation?
None needed. All my questions have been debated and answered. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We have a unanimous vote on moving the bill to delegation. And I just want to again reiterate my thanks to my district mate, Delegate Carr, for his extensive work on identifying amendments that could be compromises for all stakeholders. I really appreciate that. So that concludes the work session on MC 122. We are going to now turn to MC 2422, Montgomery County Board of Education Data Disaggregation Policy and Racial Disparity Comparisons, requested by Delegate Chi. We had the bill hearing and delegation last Friday, and we have two amendments before us today. So we have one sponsor amendment by Delegate Chi, and we have a second amendment by Delegate Plavkovich-Carr. So I would like to first take up the sponsor amendment, please, by Delegate Chi, and I will turn the floor to her to be recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I enjoyed listening to your robust debate on the previous bill. So a couple of amendments were proposed today. One will actually replace the other. So I'm actually going to withdraw my amendment relating to Pacific Islanders because it will be irrelevant if we take up the second amendment offered by Delegate Plavkovich-Carr. So briefly, I had a conversation with our liaison with MCPS, Danielle Seskin, who's also on today's call, and she proposed that we still let the system count Pacific Islander students as part of the smaller cluster of students, which are the others category. They are all very small, and it will actually be to the advantage to be continued to be attracted and reported in that category versus being lumped with the Asian Americans. And I agreed to that. So that was what the intent of the original my amendment would do. But because Delegate Plavkovich-Carr proposed another amendment, which is supported by me and my two co-sponsors, Delegate Barvet and Delegate Moon, will just take up her amendment. I can talk about that, but she can also talk about that. Okay.
Okay, so to clarify, do you have a current amendment or you're withdrawing all amendments?
I only have one. I'm going to withdraw that one related to Pacific Islanders and support Delegate Plavkovich-Carr's amendment related to a threshold, a numerical threshold instead of carving out the Asian Americans. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So then I will defer to Delegate Plavkovich-Carr to explain her amendment on the bill. Please, Delegate Plavkovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so first of all, colleagues, let me say I'm very appreciative that Delegate Chi, Delegate Barbe, and Delegate Moon brought this bill forward and fully support the intent of the legislation. As I looked at just some of the specific language in the bill, I wanted to make sure that we were capturing the full diversity of MCPS's very diverse student body. I'll say my son is part of that diversity. He is biracial and falls into what the category MCPS officially calls as 2 or more races. And in fact, that's about 5.3% of all students currently enrolled in MCPS fall into that category. So I did have a chance to talk with Delegate Chi and with both of the co-sponsors on the bill about this amendment, which would basically say that instead of calling out a particular racial or ethnic group, to say that any racial or ethnic group that comprises at least 5% of the student body should have their data disaggregated. So right now, looking at MCPS's current enrollment, the groups that would qualify under this amendment are white, Hispanic/Latino, Black or African American, Asian, or 2 or more races. I think the amendment also has the advantage of it kind of future-proofs the bill. So as our school district continues to become more diverse, there may be other racial or ethnic categories that would reach this numerical threshold and therefore should also have their data disaggregated. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Delegate Plavkovich-Carr, for bringing this amendment, and also want to thank you for connecting with our bill sponsor. I think that's just a great way to do this in general. So really appreciate that. Recognizing Chair Barbe.
Yeah, I really like this amendment because I could foresee a future where a huge number of, say, Indian Americans move into the county, and we might have to see how the South Asians are doing versus the East Asians. And I know who I think would do better, but we would have to tally up the numbers. So I'm very happy to support this amendment.
Okay, thank you, Chair Barbe. Recognizing Vice Chair Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just want to also express my support for the amendment. I think not only does it future-proof how categories may change over time as categories get bigger or larger, or as one category wants to disaggregate further. I mean, you can imagine Caribbean Africans wanting to be disaggregated from African Americans. You can imagine Latinos wanting to be separated into South American or Central American or whatever. All of this is probably on the horizon. I think the bill allows for future renaming of racial categories, which is something that has happened multiple times over history. So I just wanted to bring that up as another advantage, because you look at the history, even over the last 20 or 30 years, the definition and the names of racial categories, even when the population is static, change all the time. And this bill would allow for those changes too. So kudos to everyone involved.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stewart. So I will reiterate, as I did in our last bill, that it is customary for only members of the committee to be recognized for questions. However, I really do want to hear from the bill sponsor and from our MCPS rep. So I will formulate a question to our bill sponsor first, since she had her hand up first. Delegate Chi, do you have any comments that you can share with us, please, on this amendment?
Thank you for being so masterful in the exchange. Yes, I actually debated with myself when Plavkovich-Carr called with this brilliant idea, which I fully support, which is, what if certain communities drop below a certain threshold? Will we be concerned, right? Can we have some guarantee that certain communities like Asian Americans would always be counted? But I think, because we legislate every year, so we can always come back to it if we ever get to that point. And the other is there is a strong trend of, for example, a community like Asian Americans, regardless of ethnicities, in interracial marriage actually is a very high trend of that. So I think not having that category actually is a disservice to some students who are forced who feel like they are forced to have to, pick one or the other. So that's why I fully support that. So thank you for entertaining. And to Delegate Barbie's question, I concede Indian Americans do have highest education level. So there you go.
That's only because I'm not dragging down their scores anymore.
Too sweet. Okay, thank you, Delegate Shi, for that thoughtful feedback. Ms. Suskind, I would like to know also if MCPS has, I know that the board has not yet had an opportunity to weigh in yet on this amendment, but I would love to hear any feedback you might share about maybe the data side, I suspect, on whether this is feasible to collect and report out.
Thank you, Chair Shetty. I would just like to point out, we support this bill, MCPS. We are fine with this. We actually do already disaggregate our data. We know this came out of some confusion around the equitability framework, which we have is only one way that we slice our data. What my data people asked me to share is that we are fine with this. The only concern we have is if the bill is requiring a disaggregation of the federal categories. So for example, the federal category is American Indian or Alaskan Native. We could not separate those because it's not separated when we ask the question. So I think we follow the federal designations of how of what the categories are that we have to ask. And so that was the one thing my data team asked. The 5% is fine. The giving data by groups is fine. The, whether we combine or not as part of a slice of data is a different conversation than the conversation you're having. The only concern, as I said, is that technologically right now, we don't ask, are you Caribbean, African-American, are you whatever the case is, we use the federally designated categories. So I just wanted to put that in.
That's helpful to know. Delegate Plakovich-Carr, if I may just interject with a quick follow-up question on this, and then I'll go to you if that's okay. So Ms. Suskind, this is really helpful to know. I'm a new parent, as you know, to a kindergartner in the school system, and we are very, very pleased with the experience he's having. I was trying to remember back, and I remember when we registered, we were asked this information on our registration form. And since he's only in kindergarten, you'll have to forgive my naive question, but are students or their families required to resubmit these forms annually? And if so, is there an ability for MCPS, whenever they need to make changes, to just update that question? So then they are in the future that data to report out.
So I think there's a couple of different things there. Yes, so I don't know the exact details of how often you're asked the ability to change your designation for your racial designation. However, you are asked to reaffirm your information each year. So you would think, your emergency information, all of those kinds of things, if anything changes, you would have the opportunity to change. Obviously, by the time kids get to secondary, they begin filling out things on their own that all ask for racial designations. I think from an accountability perspective at both the federal and the state level, we must report it the way that they ask us to report it. We can do some additional things. It's much easier, obviously, to combine than it is to disaggregate. At this time, our system is not set up to disaggregate beyond the 7 federal categories, and that would require a revamping of the system. Right now, there isn't a place for them to say Caribbean African American instead of just African American. So we'd have to revise and add all of the caveats of of the different variations. And so that is a little bit of a different intention, I think, than what we've been working on. But we wanted to be clear that currently we do not have the ability to disaggregate those groups that the feds have already put together. Now, this bill came out of us aggregating data of 2 major federal groups. We do disaggregate that as well. If the issue is a disaggregation data, we do disaggregate at the 7 levels.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Yeah, and actually, I'll first follow up on your good question, Madam Chair. So my recollection is, and my son's only in first grade, so we've only done this twice now, but I believe that those forms that we had to like reaffirm our information at the beginning of the year did include the racial and ethnic data. Again, that's just my recollection from several months ago. But in terms of Ms. Suskin's remarks about what the specific, I guess, racial categories are that they are tracking. I know legislative intent is important, and I want to say my intent with the amendment is to not say what those groups should be, but rather like leave that to MCPS. They are following what the federal categories are and using those categories. So they've made the decision following the federal guidelines or law on what those categories are, and we're just saying, okay, of those categories that MCPS has already defined, any of them that are at 5% or above should be disaggregated. So not trying to dictate what those categories should be.
Thank you, Delegate. Vice Chair Stewart.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to quickly clarify my comment about Caribbean Americans was not meant to say that I think that you guys should start disaggregating based on all the categories I just came up with today, only that by writing this bill now, we can have a bill that's consistent into the future if that decision was ever made based on the realities of the school system.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Chair Barve. Oh, you are on mute, sir.
Sorry about that. A thought occurred to me, Danielle. I guess a student can only be categorized as one thing, or is it possible for a student to be categorized as, say, both black and white?
Well, I'm sorry, I'll let Ms. Suskin answer, but I believe, having just recently filled out these forms myself as well, that they have the option of picking a 2 or more option, and then you can pick from which ethnicities, but I'll have Ms. Suskin clarify if I'm mistaken.
That is correct, Chair Shetty.
Thank you.
So if I chose my child as being both Indian American and white, since my wife is Irish American, and if we had children, how'd that be counted? Would it be counted as both or 50% each? Or I'm curious, because believe it or not, this is kind of like approval voting, where you can vote for as many people as you like and they're all tallied up.
It all comes back to that, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
It all comes back to that. Ms. Susskind.
So the answer is that it's captured in the 2 or more races category. So regardless of which 2 you're identifying in that category, it currently, that is its own category. So regardless of which 2 you have in there, or 3 or 4 or 5, you're still within that category. Again, that's a relatively new federal designation. I believe that's within the last 5 years that they have just, when I was still at the State Department, they had just started doing 2 or more races. It is the largest growing category. And so I think you probably will see federal change at some point to further disaggregate 2 or more races, because I think eventually you're going to have the entire population is in there, but we're not there yet. 2 or more races only became an option, I believe, in the last 5 years. It may be 3 years. However, it is captured within the category.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Barve. And, special shout out to, me and Delegate Plakovich-Carr for making that category grow. I think unless there are further questions on the amendment to Delegate Chee's bill offered by Delegate Plakovich-Carr, may I request a motion on the amendment?
Favorable.
Thank you. Second? Is there a second? Let's go with Delegate Carlson for the second, please. So we had, and then all in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The amendment passes. To the council, may I, since it seemed like the amendment was, well, first let's switch. Do we have any debate on the bill as amended? Okay, seeing none, is there a second on the bill as amended?
Second.
Sorry, Madam Chair, was there a motion?
It wasn't.
I'll
I'm
move the bill.
Thank you. Move the bill. Second by Chair Barve. My apologies. Coffee has not kicked in yet. May I get a roll call on this vote, please?
Sure. Delegate Plakovich-Carr, how do you vote?
Yes.
Delegate Collison, how do you vote?
Yes.
Delegate Barve, how do you vote?
Yes.
Vice Chair Stewart, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Chair Shetty, how do you vote?
Yes. All right, the bill as amended passes unanimously. Congratulations, Delegate Shi. Thank you for your hard work, and thank you, Delegate Plakovich-Carr, for your amendment. That concludes the work session and voting session on MC 2422, as well as the voting session for today. Thank you, colleagues. Just a note that we will likely have another work session next week to consider a late filed bill that we will be hearing in delegation on Friday. See you all soon. Have a great day.